Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Mary.
He bosses me around.
I do. As a good CEO should. Senator Erica Betts, Senator Di Natale, and Andrew Giles, thank you very much for your heartfelt speeches. I really appreciate that. I know some of you need to go, so you are excused if you need to go, but thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to FECCA 2019 in Hobart. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, and I'd like to pay my respect to the Palawa people, their elders past, present, and emerging. Welcome everyone to the FECCA 2019 National Conference, and thank you MCoT, or the Multicultural Council of Tasmania, for hosting us in this beautiful city today. The Prime Minister spoke about Australia being a promise. I could not agree more. For me, Australia was a promise from my parents, who left behind everything to make sure they give my sibling and myself a better future. It was a promise that we will have an identity, a sense of belonging, and a respectable citizenship of a country that we can call home. The promise that we were part of a society that welcomes one and all, regardless of your faith, language, or the color of your skin. When I came to Australia in 2003 as a 13-year-old boy, Australia was that promise and more. For me, Australia has delivered and continues to deliver on that promise, and I'm very pleased to stand before you today as the CEO of the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils of Australia to celebrate our 40 years of advocacy, an organisation that has advocated for over 40 years to make sure that promise is kept for many generations of migrants and refugees to come. But as everyone knows in this room, the experience of migrants and refugees in this country has not been easy. This is why I think the work of FECCA does in making this country as welcoming, as fair, and as safe place as possible for all Australians is so important. It is especially important in an environment where migrants and refugees are used as scapegoats. FECCA, however, does not exist in a vacuum. We are a federation of member organisations from around the country, and we are supported by hundreds of other community groups whose hard work to identify issues, advocate on behalf of those in need, are absolutely essential. FECCA does not perform its role effectively without these extensive networks and the dedicated people, and we thank you all for your support. We titled this year's conference Purpose, Leadership, Progress, 40 Years and Beyond. We did that because it is here that we will refocus our purpose, make strategies to lead the nation on important social issues, and explore how we evolve and adapt in this changing political environment. This is why these conferences are so important, because it is in these forums that we will hear concerns, harvest ideas, and set the advocacy agenda for FECCA in the coming years. I would like to also thank our sponsors. This is the boring bit for most people, but seriously, without our sponsors, many people would not be here today, and you know who you are. We have been able to give more than 100 scholarships to many young people here today, and the diversity in the room is no accident. If you see a sponsor, please go up to them and say thank you, because of them, you are here. Over the next 2 days, we invite you to participate in as many of the 28 sessions as you can on topics ranging from human rights, cold data issues, social cohesion, to employment, to racism and mental health. I'm sure you are as excited as I am to hear from leaders in human rights, social justice and advocacy, including the former Socceroos captain Craig Foster and social justice advocate Tim Costello, and many more. Now I'd like to invite the keynote speakers, Rodney, Dillon, and Hannah Asafiri, to come up to the stage. Thank you to our politicians. And Mary. Thank you. I believe multiculturalism begins with recognising the rights and place in society held by Australia's First Nations people. and the rich cultural heritage that their communities have long nurtured. Last night, we were honoured to launch our first Reconciliation Action Plan to mark the importance of creating a culture of mutual respect and harmony between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and multicultural communities. During this conference, I want to ensure that there is a growing awareness and inclusivity around reconciliation both within our organisation and across our membership. Now I'm honoured to introduce Rodney Dillon and Hannah Safiri. I will introduce in 2 seconds. We did have the President of Multicultural New Zealand planned to be with us today, but I believe his flight has been delayed. So we will see if we can get him up on stage when he comes. Is he here? Oh, not yet. Okay, thank you. Let me know when he's here. Rodney Dillon is a Palawa elder from Tasmania, the Indigenous Rights Advisor for Amnesty International Australia, member of the Stolen Generation Alliance, Australians for Truth, Justice and Healing, and a former Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commissioner for Tasmania. Please put your hand together for Rodney Dillon.
Thank you. I too would like to acknowledge that this land, Ron, is Aboriginal land. It always has been Aboriginal land and it always will be. And I'll just give you a little bit of history about where my people have come from before we talk about where we're going to go. I think it's important in this state to talk about history because no one else talks about it. If we have a look around at all the brass statues around the town, there's no Aboriginal people. Our history in this town is invisible. But I'd like to thank FECCA for the work that you have done the last couple of days in identifying our culture and our history in this place. If we go back 40 or 50,000 years in this state, we think of my people who travelled round here and lived on these lands. The river on this side was a boundary, the Huon River on the other side was a boundary, and the mountain range behind this one was a boundary. And then if you drive into town today, you see little fences around houses. There's a bit of difference in the back. To acknowledge our people, how we cherished and lived sustainably on this land for thousands of years, how our people farmed this land. And this land was farmed with fire. Our people fired this country at the right time of the year to burn it off, to make sure the new grasses came for our kangaroos and our other animals that we hunted to live on. Not unlike some people from at this place today, sustainably harvesting in their native lands. And 10,000 years ago, our people lived through 2 ice ages, lived right on the edge of the glaciers. So our people understand difference in temperatures and global warming and the consequences of that. And when that ice melted, we became an island and isolated from the mainland 10,000 years ago. Still living on those sustainable lands and still harvesting and living off the land in a sustainable manner for our people. Then if we go back the last 230 years, we had them boats come up the river with those raggy sails on them. And those people on those boats came here to murder our people and take their land off them, to steal their land and shoot the people, to poison the water holes, to take our culture, our language and our way of life away from our people. This is what happened to our people here. But that history has never been told honestly, and we haven't had that conversation in this country about that. Our people were shot from those boats, and then ashore people came and shot our people again. Our people moved off their lands and moved to other areas, but then after a while there was a war declared here in Tasmania on our people. and they had a thing called the Black Line where they travelled through this country within gunshot of one another to shoot our people on this land. We had slaves in this country. You wouldn't think we'd have slaves in Australia, would you? Doesn't look like it. And our way of life was changed forevermore. Our people, my people, was moved to Flinders Island and then come back and live down at Oyster Cove down the road. And then we had the government and a lot of the Christian groups who took our children away, stole the children out of the mother's arms because they thought that we were savages and that we couldn't look after our children. We'd been looking after our children for probably 2,500 to 3,000 generations, but all of a sudden we couldn't look after them. And to this day we still have trouble trusting those governments and those Christian groups that believed they was better than what we was. Today we don't have faith in one another. So I think those things is a bit about the history of where my people come from. And then I think about, still today, our people, we've got the poorest health. Our people die 10 to 15 years younger than anyone else in this country. We've got a lot of kids in prison, and the work I do with Amnesty is we lock up 10-year-old kids in this country. 10-year-old kids, and we put them in prison, in detention. And then we put them in isolation as well. So the work I do with Amnesty is about trying to get those kids out of prison and trying to change that and have Indigenous-led solutions and diversion programs to stop our kids from being in there and in that way. And to have some life and to have once we lock kids up, it's like quicksand. They never get out. So we talk about better education, we talk about better housing, but one thing we don't always talk about is acceptance. And I hear the word inclusion and acceptance. These words are very important if we talk about what acceptance means and what does inclusion mean. And they're very important words, and there's other words that travel around with them. There's racism, and there's other words that live in that little container with them. But those words about acceptance by a whole of a country. And if we have a look just a couple of years ago here in a sport, here we've got this sport called AFL, that there's a bloke called Adam Goods. And when he stood up for his people, he was booed by 80,000 people. Every time he went to get the football, they booed him. And to the stage, he was probably the best footballer in this country at that time, and he stopped playing football because of the way people was booing him. That's not acceptance. If we think of this country as being acceptance, we've got to change our policies about what acceptance means, about how we hold each other's hand. And if we think about the people that's come here in the past, some people come here with guns to shoot our people, but people after that come here to have a better life from other countries for similar reasons to what we've got. And how we put our hands out together and to be able to walk arm in arm with that acceptance. If I hear today about there's probably 300 different languages, and there's about 300 different Aboriginal languages in this country as well. If we talk about minorities, we're a minority in our own country, and we've only just got the First Minister for Aboriginal Affairs to be actually Aboriginal, which is a step in the right direction, and I think that it's one of the starts. It's one of those stones that we've got to put together. These are all steps in this land that we need to take, not just for Aboriginal people, but for all people. And when minority groups, we feel that big word, that big R is almost plastered, like that young girl on the bus. That big R was plastered well and truly on her back. And it's very hard to get that big R off your back. That feeling when you're on a bus or when you're in a shop and you don't get served, they serve the person behind you. I could kick the counter down when they do that. But those are the things, that's the word about acceptance and inclusion. And how we have that inclusion in this country. We are only a young country, and we are built from a lot of different groups, And the different groups that have come here have strengthened this country. They've strengthened it with workforce, they've strengthened it with food. They've also strengthened it with song and dance. And we strengthen it with languages as well. Don't underestimate all those things that make a country like this important. Song and dance, education together, fairness, all these things must travel in the same boat. They're all important steps, I feel, for us to go ahead as a country. And, you know, I'm 130 kilo. I like going to other places and eating their foods as well. I probably shouldn't eat as much, but sharing that. And even our food was taken off us. We had food here that they decided they could sell overseas, so they whipped that out from underneath us and sold that, and then made it illegal for us to have that food. We are getting some of that food back today, but it's very slow. They're steps we take, but they're certainly all important steps we take. Like I said, this country's only a few hundred years old. It's still immature, and it still makes immature mistakes as a country. But the mistakes, we need to learn from the mistakes that we've had in the past and put that hand out to want to learn and travel together, to learn other languages, to learn, first of all, here in Tasmania, we've got to learn our own language. Have we heard the young girl this morning talking her language? There was other languages here in the state as well. We had 7 or 8 languages plus trading languages as well. So learning those languages are really important. Changing those statues around town, those brass plaques to remember the red-nosed man. The red-nosed man has played a big role in this state and probably still does to a certain extent today, and I'm pleased to see that you've got more women on your council, FECCA council. They're all significant changes, but certainly sitting here this morning thinking about how many things everyone in this room's got in common, and when we've all got those same things in common, we come together. And they're important steps for us to share perhaps more, to share more history and to share more culture with one another, I think is what will make this country a better country in 10 years' time. And, in 10 years' time, the red-nosed man mightn't still be here. He might be dissolved and we might have more women. And within my family, women have been very strong. Our families have been run by women for many generations. So I think they're just all steps and learning stones for us all to take on board. And I just hope that some of these things that I've talked about this morning they're important to me, and I hope they're important to you. Thank you.